Stenemo, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
How are you doing since the last time we spoke?
I'm doing great. Had a nice week, quite productive.
Cool. Well, for me, because I recently moved to Poland, I had quite a challenging one, but as I usually try to frame it, challenges are mostly formative if you try to incorporate them the right way and don't feel like you're crushed by them. So overall, I think I'm quite okay, and I'm also thriving a lot in for just like 1 week's acclimatization. So that's a little bit where I stand right now. Nonetheless, email. So what comes to your mind when I say email? Is it like the classic 90s commercial or more recent flood?
I think for me, it's a bad way of writing a lot of messages. That's basically what comes to mind.
Oh, that's so interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
So it basically takes the worst part of writing letters by hand and combines it with the worst way of communicating by short text messages, that you end up writing a short introduction and then a short sign off, and then you have very little actual message in between. And it could have been finished in half the time if you had seen the person in person.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting idea, because like compared to other kinds of mediums, when you just really do emails, say like, hey, and hope everything is well with you, and like looking forward to see you again. So is that what you mean by like these headers and then the sign off, so to speak?
Kind of, yes. I think if you imagine a postcard, so if someone wanted to ask you something over email, but instead they took up a postcard and wrote a lovely greetings from Chicago, and then wrote, do you have this file I've been looking for? And then they put it in the mail. That's basically how inefficient email is.
But it's a lot faster, right?
The only fast part is the part where it's actually sent faster. The actual message writing is basically as slow, because you end up spending too much time phrasing it. So email is so formal that you end up spending more time phrasing the question rather than actually asking the question.
Yeah, exactly. So do you prefer emailing or just calling? Because some people really don't want to call, just like try to stick to email. But I also know other people who just want to get it right away without any extra effort. So where are you in this?
I think for most situations, when you can call, it's a better option. For example, if you want to book a meeting, you wouldn't call the person to ask when should we have a meeting. You would usually email them.
Yeah, because like you can kind of like answer in your own convenience, so to speak. Do you use services like Calendly? Speaking of meeting,
I have tried a
scheduling?
few of those, and I think as long as the people you collaborate with use it and are comfortable with it, they are a really good way of fitting in meetings in a busy schedule.
Yeah, because the beautiful thing with Calendly is like you basically don't need to worry about the entire process as with in regards to doing the back and forth and then trying to put into the calendar and hope for like the link would be generated by yourself, but instead from the Calendly and stuff like that. So I tried to use it now for a while for some edition of the Total Living, which by the time it will be. By the time the podcast episode has been sent out, you will already have known this announcement, which I link in the description. But so therefore, I find that other tools can assist the more mundane activity of just like emailing back and forth, because that could probably be something a little bit of concern, like this more unstructured way of communicating. Maybe that's more what can you say, the phone usage of probably, and when I mean phone usage, mostly mean the calls. Like the calls are more synchronous while the email is more asynchronous, and they can have their benefits and drawbacks, I guess. So let's go back to email then, because when you actually go into email, do you like treat it as some kind of an inbox zero method, or you're just like trying to make sure that nothing really falls through the crack in other kinds of ways? How is your email system, so to speak?
Yes, I follow the inbox zero and only handle it once principle, which basically means that when I get an email, I have no notification that I have received it. So if it's an urgent message, I will just see it when I get to it. And usually I look at my email once before lunch and at least once before the end of the day. And then I take the time to go through all my emails at that point when I look at the email. So if I have maybe 5 emails in the morning, I'll just look through them. And if it's something that has to be dealt with, I deal with it as soon as I read the email, rather than having to get back to it at a later date, because then I end up spending so much time reading the same email twice, just because I didn't feel like I had enough time the first time. So I will rather spend a few extra minutes the first time I see an email to deal with it completely so that I can leave it behind.
Yeah, I understand. And it's also nice that you like combine both like inbox zero and only handle it once, because the combination is like, okay, now you have to basically take your time when it comes to doing a more, what you say, elaborated answer, since you like only touch it once, I guess.
Yes, exactly. I will usually do it on my phone quite quickly. And if it's not too formal, I could just dictate a short message to answer it. And I really strive towards keeping a very informal conversation unless necessary. So as informal as possible. Quick, just hello, comma, and then answering the question or asking a question.
Okay, so you're one of the few people who actually dictates the emails, I guess.
Yes, I do end up correcting it after dictating it, but still saving some time.
So do you have some kind of like headphones and a microphone where you work and just like talk out loud?
Exactly. I use the headphones that I listen to music with anyway, so it's very convenient for me. I have quite nice sound excluding ones, which is good for me, as I prefer to work without any background noise apart from music.
Yeah, I completely understand. It's good to be in your own tunnel of tension, so to speak. But what kind of dictation service are you using? Just like the built-in one, or another
So I
third
use
party?
the Google dictation service on the Android phone. So I usually check my email on my phone and use the keyboard on my phone.
Okay, so you don't respond to emails so much on the computer, I guess.
I try to avoid it because that usually ends up making you slower. For me, it's faster if I see it on my phone. It also has some limitations in that it intentionally has made it simplified some things, in that you cannot use as complex stamping systems for the email. You only have star or no star, while on the Gmail interface on the computer, you have more functionality, which actually can be a hindrance for you.
Yeah, there have a lot of these like campaigns and primary and stuff like that. I personally do not use them, and I don't think they are very productive either. But what I found very fascinating with like your way of dealing with emails, like the low friction stuff, because computer requires you to be in a certain place, but you can basically, like, if you're dictating, you could theoretically, maybe it's not in working practice, but you could theoretically ride a bike and answering email at the same time. Is that correct?
Yes, in theory, you should be able to, because it shouldn't be something that's harder than talking with a person who is physically present.
But can you send the email as well while you're riding, or isn't it that advanced?
For several reasons, I wouldn't do it that way. It's even if an email dictation is 99% correct, that one time when it gets something completely wrong, you still have to look at the message.
Yeah, in case you write something very, what can you say, inappropriate, thanks to the
Usually
autocorrect.
it's a case of if you say something that's a negative, like I shall not do it, it's quite easy for it to miss the not, and then it ends up having the opposite message as intended.
Yeah, that would be quite embarrassing to like try to correct it later on. So I guess that
Exactly.
security check makes it basically more
Yes.
maybe you could like, because I don't know how easy it is for Android stuff like that, but if it's possible that you can like read or rather speak the message for you, so you can like, before you try to look at it, say like, okay, now it's going to say exactly what it says, and only if it's an error you can like stop and try to correct it, but otherwise you just send it in. Or
yes,
is that the
is
next
a
level?
possibility to do, but it's still much faster to look at it while you dictate. So for me, email is a case of how quickly can I finish this email? It's basically a practice of doing it as fast as possible. And for me at the moment, when it's an informal email, I can just dictate it and be done with it. And if it's only a case of a typo, I could even be okay with leaving it, as long as I keep it informal. It doesn't have to be perfect. Your email should not be perfect if it takes you twice as long to write it.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in this dictation thing. I will try to do it myself, because I usually type quite fast on the mobile phone, but there is still some kind of like activity going on, and maybe it's just like easy to just like use your normal voice anyway. So I'll report back next week how it went for me, because I'm very fascinated by ways to like make it less, or rather more frictionless.
Yes, I think they have improved the dictation quite a lot in the last few years. Even with new phones coming out, their dictation software has improved. So it's gone from being quite poor to now being, for most people, it's actually faster to dictate, as long as you're okay with letting a few small mistakes through.
But then you have to say something like comma and point and exclamation mark and new paragraph and stuff like that.
Yes, that is still an issue, that it's a slow process of getting those punctuations correct. I try to finish one paragraph, usually all that's needed for an informal message.
Okay, so it's not like you trying to make it like visually appealing, just like get it over.
I'm not writing a book.
It's not like a business memo.
Yes, exactly. When it comes to email, if it can be done in one paragraph, it should.
Yeah, because like that's something that you've taught me like recently, to be like more shorter and concise. And as you've probably seen on the Total Living, I try to live up to that standard. So that could be like one way of, because I truly believe that now, like if you can say something in like 3 words instead of 8 words, you should go with the 3 words, because yeah, it's easier, faster, basically more upside than downside.
Yes, I agree.
And that's probably something, another reason why email can sometimes be perceived as some, what can you say, mysterious force that hinders from correct work, because people are trying to like write perfect email because they're going to be graded by the stylish looks rather than their actual work. Have you seen that tendency among your colleagues?
I very much agree, although not so much among my closest colleagues.
Because how do you do the emails at Karolinska? Is it formal or informal?
The more people that are involved and the less you know them, the more formal it becomes. But it's never so formal that you should waste time going over small details. For example, you mentioned making it look beautiful. That is not the aim of an email.
So then, so you're not doing like Shakespeare on dictation mode, I guess.
Exactly. It's really, and the goal for me when it comes to my inbox is get through it and never have to deal with the same email twice. Of course, if it's a question of this person asked me something that I do not know the answer to, then I can either star it to get back to it, or I could forward it to a person who knows the answer. And usually it's much better to just directly forward the email or start a draft. So I start answering the email on my phone, and knowing that I will check my inbox from new messages from this person. While when I'm on my computer, I will go through my drafts, so my email drafts. And there it can be a case of, I do not know now, I do not have access to the information on my phone. And then when I'm on my computer, I will go through those and add that information, depending on what kind of missing information there is. Usually it's a case of them asking something that I actually have to perform some kind of analysis or follow up on. And then it's a case of just starring it and get back to it later in the week.
Okay, so you use a star system in order to make sure that it's collected. You do not use remember the milk for it, I guess.
Exactly.
And for those who don't know, I'm acquainted with the fact that Stenemo's favorite to-do list is Remember the Milk. Is it still the case?
Yes, it's been the case for more than 5 years now. It's the one that fits my purpose the best. I have tried quite a few, and of course, there are other ones that have more beautiful interface. There are other ones that have some features that are not available on RTM, Remember the Milk. But I think all the features that I need are available on Remember the Milk at the moment. So I'm very pleased with it.
Yeah, I'm fascinated that I've used it for more than 5 years, because in this like technological day and age, like things go so fast and people usually switch from one app to another, but you stay consistent with one particular interface, I guess.
Yes, I have tried multiple in the last 10 years, but this is the one that I've stuck to the longest.
That's so cool. And I want to dedicate an entire episode to Remember the Milk, if that's okay for you.
That would be very interesting to talk about.
Because there's so much questions going on in like the needs, the needs and weeds of the to-do list world, which many of the listeners also will be interested to know. But like two more questions regarding the email before we move on to instant messenger, although we have covered up some parts since we previously agreed on the fact that email is basically an in-between between the postal cards and the more fast delivery. But how many emails do you get usually per day? We can assume that it's a normal every day.
I would say between 10 and 20.
10 and 20. That's not a lot though compared to modern.
Yeah, it's a case of we switching from usually having meetings. So schedule a meeting is usually a better way of doing it for bigger things. So basically most of my emails are quite short questions. And then I'm not counting the spam, of course. Then it's much more.
Yeah, of course.
But so it's basically around 10 that I actually have to answer.
Okay. Do you use filters a lot in terms of the spam thing, or is it something that's...
No, I would say that I basically go through it and mark everything as spam whenever it's spam that isn't caught by the filter that exists in Gmail.
I see. So, but are you still using like email newsletters, or do you not count them as like urgent emails?
Them you don't have to answer, so I'm not counting those. So it's those are more you're reading. It's like an RSS alternative, basically. These newsletters.
Can you recommend some of these newsletters?
I would probably not recommend anyone that's relevant enough to a broad audience. I think the Effective Altruism newsletter is quite good.
Oh, okay, cool. So let's dedicate an entire episode on it in half a year. How about that?
That sounds good.
Because I mean, since we're doing this once a week, we will soon reach out to more like broader and more adjacent topics. So I think we can definitely like cover it. So and I know that you're pretty passionate about it too. So it should be a fun episode.
Yes.
I guess. But let's not take too many steps in advance. But 10 to 20 emails. But it's not like you have, for some reason, made in accordance, like, because some people really try to make sure that they do not receive any emails. Like you're not quite picky with your like email address or try to make them private or try to make some other.
I do end up spending quite a few minutes every week marking things as a spam and basically unsubscribing whenever something switches from being good enough. So I'm very, very limited in what newsletters I get, for example. At the moment, it's basically just 1 or 2 newsletters that I actually read on a weekly basis.
But do you have many people like reaching out to you, which you feel like it's spam because it's not really too opportunistic in your opinion?
No, I wouldn't say so. It's more a case of mass email.
I'm just thinking of like these massive successful people who get like 300 requests every day. They surely have to like put the bar somewhere, and I guess that they were probably more interested in like putting some kind of spam filter, or maybe they have an assistant for it. I don't know. You haven't considered? Nah, probably not, because you're not receiving so many emails.
Yeah, when you receive 300 emails per day, I think that's when you have to have a more formal system and another person doing it.
Yeah, like full time and stuff like that. It's maybe we get to it in the future, like correct delegation, stuff like that. But just like one,
I'm optimistic that we actually end up using email even less in the future.
okay,
Because it's there are better alternatives for even for those situations. I think that's part of the reason why we've gone from in our generation, you don't have this chain mail where you actually have what you have on, for example, YouTube videos on Facebook. Instead of that system, 20 years ago when email was new, you actually had basically cat videos emailed from person to person because people had so much use for email that they used it for basically what we use social media for today. So I think the best part of communication in email is probably not reaching out to new people. For that, we have social platforms. Basically, in the early days, email was used in the same way that we use social platforms today. And in the same way, in 10 years from now, email will be used more dedicated for certain tasks. And those tasks should not be meeting new people that you have no idea who this email is. And you currently cannot trust that the email address that you see is the correct person. So the trust in the email system has actually decreased quite a lot due to spam. And it's quite easy to do mass spam email, while on social media, you have less of this issue. If you talk about famous people, you don't hear what they have emailed, you hear what they have tweeted. That's because great. Email is not the way that mass media is consumed today.
So a couple of months ago, I read this bestseller book, A World Without Email, which mostly is more about like the workflow under it. But based in light of this conversation, when you previously mentioned that like other tools could basically replace email in various circumstances, could you imagine a future, for instance, like 10 to 20 years from now, probably when we have artificial intelligence, but let's leave that for another episode. But could you see a future in which like email was as dead as probably insert an old technology?
I think that, what email replaced is a good example. Like there was a time when instead of calling someone, you had a dialer that you basically told them to call you. And before that, you have the telegraph. And the telegraph was basically Morse code at light speed. And that was really a big change. And that was basically 100 years ago, that you could actually have a telegraph communicate basically as fast as an email is today. It's just a case of more people having to be involved in decoding the message at the other end. There's always going to be a new technique replacing an old technique once there is a need for it. And at the moment, email serves a purpose, but I think there are many people looking into how they can serve that purpose in a better way. Just like email actually did replace a worse technique, for example, fax. No one in their right mind choose to fax someone when they could just take a picture of the document and send it via their phone or email it.
Yeah, I think it's very important to like always go back to like the purpose of email. And if it's just like some kind of mix in between postcard and and just like instant message, it would probably make it very easy to just like have another system in place, probably more like frictionless. I'm thinking more in terms of the metaverse, or maybe I'm like too affected by the news nowadays. But I could probably see some more frictionless ways of just like transferring text from one brain to another, so to speak.
Yeah, I imagine such a time in the distant future, but I think that is so far in the distant future that it's not really worth it for us to delve into the details.
Yeah, we should probably stop there before we go too far. So before we wrap up this episode, I just want to mention Instant Messenger more in its full form, although we have touched on it in multiple occasions. So could you say that Instant Messenger is more in general the most preferred method of communicating text-wise?
When it comes to communicating text-wise, I think it's the fastest way. There you usually end up skipping the whole hello, and you don't say goodbye in an instant message. You go straight to the question. And then it's basically informal way where you ask exactly what you want. You don't beat around the bush. You state exactly what it is you don't understand or want to know, or your specific question. And you do not have to be that careful about making it too informal or too abbreviated.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the fact that you can just like dive deep into one previous conversation with all context and stuff like that speaks a little bit more to the more frictionless experience of instant messaging app and stuff like that. So which ones do you prefer and why?
I think when it comes to my preference is mostly about functionality, but you do not want too much functionality if it's a basic, I just want a back and forth with a stranger. Then I'm fine with just SMS, even though it's very outdated and there's many things you cannot use it for. For just basic stranger, I need to meet up at this specific time to meet them. Then I think SMS is fine. But the more functionality, the better. But it of course assumes that everyone knows how to use it. So for example, Slack, when it came, it actually revolutionized how to do email alternatives. So if you're not familiar with Slack, it's basically taking a text conversation and making it possible to include as many people as you want in the same conversation. Of course, Messenger has the same functionality today, but the big part that Slack was quite new in adding was that every message could be replied to and then be linked back to that original statement. So you can see the whole conversation, same as in any text message app, but you could actually link between messages. And you could also comment directly on the message. You can make stickers that are directly related to that specific question. So if you ask someone, if you could, for example, ask how many people want food, and then you could react directly to that message with a hands up. And then you could see how many hands up there were on that specific message. Rather than everyone having to say, I want food, you could just have a sticker to signal that. And then each message could actually convey much more information.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. And I usually like try to compare Slack to other kinds of alternatives such as Discord and stuff like that. But when I think about it, Slack is really doing quite well in terms of trying to bridge the forum with the instant messenger, because I never thought about the fact that you can like have multiple dimensions of messages, because not only do you have like the chronological main one, you could go like levels deeper and deeper in order to form their own branches, so to speak. So that's a very cool way. But do you use Slack often? Because from what I see, Slack is most often used in terms of either an organization or it's probably organization, either private, public, or non-profit.
Yeah, I think you highlight a big issue with such a system, and it's the fact that everyone has to dedicate time to add themselves to the system. It's not as simple as a forum. It actually has to take at least one person spending quite some time setting up the system. Not that much time today as it used to be, but still someone has to set up the system, and then everyone has to spend some time actually joining this system. When it comes to, for example, Messenger, it's very simple. It's kind of like with email that everyone has this one account and you can always join any conversation. And that's the downside with any platform like Slack, that you actually end up spending some time working around the system to make the system work in the first place. And I think we're going to end up having multiple platforms that you much more easily can jump between, but we are not there yet.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine like the more decentralized future of instant messages, because like the topic of decentralization with bitcoins and other stuff is quite on topic. So one could argue like a more distributed way of messaging would probably make up for a more like democratized and probably more frictionless way of like doing one step further apart from email, stuff like that. So
I think so too. That's basically going to be I think the basic functionality is going to be expanded so that the basic apps are going to basically incorporate the good things that exist in these platforms. For example, Messenger having added some of these features. And I'm sure that in 10 years from now, they have probably added quite a few more features that do not exist today.
Yeah, exactly. That's very interesting to think about. But if you think of like your own usage, because there are quite a few of messaging apps, all from Messenger, which we both communicate on, And there is WhatsApp, there is Telegram, there is Discord, there is we mentioned Slack before, and also Microsoft Teams and Amazon Chime do have their instant messenger as well. So which one do you preferably lean on? Is it just SMS? Probably not.
I would say that it depends on the situation. I think when you can just write an SMS, then I think it's fine to just use that system. If it's just you have one question, SMS should be fine. If you have 100 people and you want to organize a field trip or you want to organize a wedding, then SMS is a terrible system.
We'll be interested to see that situation.
So I think if you have a team of 10 people and you're always communicating, then I think Slack is a good way of doing it, or any similar like Teams. I think either one is perfectly fine. But as soon as you have people coming and going, it's so much more convenient to do a simple service that everyone has access to, and you do not have to have an account to add yourself to. That's why Zoom had such a success, because it's basically anyone with a link can join. And that's the reason why it became so successful. The convenience of it.
Yeah, we're recording this podcast on Zoom right now, so that speaks for the technology itself. I fully agree on that. And
it's good to mention that the text functionality of Zoom is terrible, in that you cannot even find the text button on the standard screen. You actually end up having to. It's the one of the many functions that is not even shown on the initial screen, because it's not meant to be a text service.
Yeah, it's more like stripped down to its core functionality, which probably could be either a good or a bad thing, depending on how you want this to be, like single use or multi-use.
Yeah,
that could probably be an episode of its own.
I think it's actually intentional that it's tried to discourage text conversation, because Zoom is so much better over other, using the actual speech is much better than actual, and then starting to text has a tendency to beget more texting.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe Zoom doesn't want to be all in all a text service, more like
they don't want to encourage you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's more like worst case, use text, but other than that, turn on your camera and show your mouth.
Exactly. And I think that's also why it's such a great service, because it has no barriers for people to enter.
Yeah, I completely agree with like the guest feature and stuff like that. So when it comes to my instant messaging use, it mostly depends on the person. For instance, like one person I converse with via WhatsApp, and other people I converse via Discord because they prefer Discord or WhatsApp or other kinds of services. If I have to choose, it's probably like Facebook Messenger, but that's because I'm conservative in that part. But so that's kind of like the more scattered reality for my end, stuff like that. Is it kind of the same thing too, that some people prefer to be on the platform only?
Yeah, I think so.
And one last thing before we wrap up, how do you make sure that you not get, what can you say, sucked into the vortex of instant messenger chats and messages?
Yeah, for me, it's quite easy to, as soon as this is no longer serving a purpose for me, I'm very okay with just leaving the service. I have there's no reason for me to feel obliged to stay in a conversation that is that is not relevant for me. So I'm quite okay with muting a conversation where it is no longer relevant for me.
Yeah, that's probably a very good thing to have this in mind. Like, okay, why am I using? Does it serve me the purpose that I've intentionally sought out to fulfill? And if not, then I can like make sure to draw back on it a little and stuff like that. And that's probably quite a fine balance, especially when you have your like BFF like texting like all day long and you're trying to like keep up and stuff like that. So maybe it was in group settings, but other than that, is it like necessary to have some kind of like agreement, like this is how much I text to you and Snapchat and all stuff like that? And I don't know, is this kind of explicit agreements even necessary in this day and age?
I do not know anyone who does it.
Me neither. So I guess we'll follow up on that point, because that's probably more related to the next topic, which will be about social media. Stenemo, thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you.
As always. And see you next week.
Same to you. Take care.
Take care.